The calendar invite landed at 6:18 a.m. on a Monday. Subject: Organizational Alignment Discussion. No agenda. No attachment. Just me, HR, the CFO, and a conference room on the 8th floor that was usually reserved for terminations and budget cuts. The room was called Harbor because apparently nothing says professional mercy killing like nautical branding. I stared at the invite while my coffee went cold in my hand. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my boss: "Please bring your laptop and badge." That was the whole message. Efficient, at least. My name is Marisol Vega. I was 46 years old, and I had spent 11 years as supply chain operations manager at Albright Medical Components in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We made precision parts for hospital equipment manufacturers, valves, calibration assemblies, pressure control housings, the small things nobody thinks about until one of them is missing and a production line stops. My job was to make sure nothing was missing. Not in theory. In practice. Over 11 years, I reduced our average component shortage rate from 14.6% to 2.1%. I renegotiated long-term vendor agreements that saved Albright $8.7 million in landed cost without switching to cheaper materials. I built our Supplier Continuity Grid, which ranked every vendor not just by price, but by lead time reliability, customs risk, quality defect history, and how likely their plant was to shut down during a weather event or a labor dispute. In plain English, it told us which suppliers would actually deliver when life became inconvenient. Life becomes inconvenient more often than executives remember. I also built the Critical Parts Escalation Protocol, which was the system that kept our two biggest clients, Halden Surgical and Northlake Diagnostics, from ever seeing the chaos behind the curtain. If a shipment slipped, a factory flooded, a resin shortage hit, or a supplier suddenly discovered email was optional, the protocol told us who to call, what inventory to release, what alternate lane to activate, and which client commitment could not move under any circumstances. That protocol prevented an estimated $4.9 million in expedited freight and production penalties in the 3 years before I was fired. Not that anyone called it fired. Corporate America has an entire spice rack of words for removing a person and hoping they do not notice the knife. I missed my daughter's junior year orchestra concert because a German supplier's customs broker misfiled a batch of pressure sensors, and I spent 5 hours on the phone getting the shipment released before Northlake's line shut down. I answered vendor calls from my mother's hospital room during her final month because one of our injection mold partners in Ohio had a labor issue, and I knew which secondary supplier could cover the gap without triggering a validation review. Nobody asked me to do those things. That is how operations usually works. If you do it well, nobody notices. If you stop doing it, everyone suddenly develops a deep appreciation for boring women with spreadsheets. The man who replaced me did not appreciate boring women with spreadsheets. His name was Ethan Albright. He was 32 years old, the CEO's son, and as of that January, Albright Medical Components' brand new chief operating officer. He had previously spent 18 months at a venture-backed meal kit company in Chicago, where, according to his own introduction email, he had scaled last-mile efficiencies across dynamic fulfillment ecosystems. The company went bankrupt 4 months after he left. That detail did not appear in the introduction email. Ethan arrived wearing slim Italian suits that looked expensive and somehow unfinished, like they had been purchased by someone who believed tailoring was an attitude. He wore white sneakers to plant tours and called our clean room the lab, which the quality director, Ruth Bennett, corrected 3 times before giving up and correcting him silently with her eyes. On his 3rd day, he walked into the operations bullpen holding a leather notebook he never wrote in and said, "I'm here to simplify supply chain." Ruth looked over the top of her glasses. I said, "Good morning." He smiled at me like he was granting culture. "You're Marisol, right? The vendor matrix person. Supply chain operations manager. Right. I've heard you're the institutional brain on all this." Institutional brain. A phrase that sounds complimentary until you notice the person using it has already decided the institution needs a lobotomy. He leaned against Marcus Chen's desk without asking. Marcus was our logistics analyst, 38, quiet, excellent with route data, and allergic to nonsense in a way I respected deeply. Ethan tapped the edge of Marcus's monitor. "We need to stop over-engineering procurement," he said. "It's vendor management, not air traffic control." Marcus did not look up. "Some weeks it's both." Ethan laughed because he thought Marcus was joking. He was not. That first month, Ethan held a series of operational listening sessions, which mostly involved him talking while people who understood operations listened to their own patients being tested. He mispronounced supplier names. He confused lead time with transit time. He suggested that we move 2 validated medical component suppliers to an online bidding platform because competition creates natural efficiency. Ruth said, "Those vendors are validated under our client quality files." Ethan waved a hand. "Validation is just documentation." Ruth set her pen down very carefully. "No," she said. "Documentation is how you prove validation happened." Ethan blinked once, then smiled like she had said something charming but not relevant. "We're going to need less legacy thinking," he said. "Legacy thinking is what people call experience when they cannot afford to admit they need it." I watched him for 6 weeks. I watched him ask procurement why we carried buffer stock on single-source components. I watched him tell finance that our dual-lane freight contracts were redundant optionality, which sounded sophisticated if you did not understand that one of those lanes existed because the other closed every February under ice. I watched him suggest cutting the supplier continuity grid because, in his words, we can get the same insight from a quarterly vendor scorecard. Quarterly vendor scorecards are useful if your crisis politely waits for the end of March. One afternoon in February, Ethan came to my desk with a printed copy of the continuity grid. Printed. In color. He had highlighted random cells like a student trying to prove he had read the book. "Walk me through this," he said. I looked at the sheet. "Which part?" "The risk tiers." I explained them. Briefly. Vendor A might be cheaper, but if Vendor A had a 26-day lead time, 2 late shipments in a quarter, and a customs exposure in winter, they were not cheaper when North Lake's line needed parts on Tuesday. Vendor B might cost 12 cents more per unit and save you $600,000 in emergency freight during a disruption. He nodded in the way people nod when they have already decided the answer is too complicated. "So basically," he said, "it's a preference model." "No." He looked up. "It's a continuity model," I said. "Right. But preference-driven. Risk-driven." He smiled. "We'll align on language." We did not align on language. A week later, I heard him on a call with a consulting group called Straightabridge Operations. They specialized in lean procurement transformation, which in practice meant sending 27-year-olds with certification templates into industries they did not understand and calling the resulting damage efficiency. Ethan had them on speaker in his office. "Our internal supply chain function is very relationship-heavy," he said. "We need to convert that into scalable vendor abstraction." Vendor abstraction. There are phrases that should make a building sprinkler system activate. Priya Nair, our senior buyer, walked past my desk holding a folder and mouthed, "Vendor what?" I said, "Keep walking." Priya had been with Albright for 7 years and knew more about specialty metals suppliers than any executive in that building. She could tell by the way a vendor rep answered the phone whether a shipment was going to arrive late. That was not in any dashboard. It was just competence. By March, Ethan had a plan. The plan was called Project Streamline because men with PowerPoint decks cannot resist naming the thing that is about to hurt people. He presented it in the main training room, Cascade, to about 30 managers. The room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and burnt coffee. Ethan stood at the front beside a slide that said, "Moving from people-dependent operations to platform-enabled agility." I sat in the second row beside Ruth. Marcus sat behind me. Priya sat 2 seats over with her arms folded and her expression set to professional survival. Ethan clicked to a slide with a pyramid. At the bottom, legacy processes. In the middle, contractor support. At the top, strategic oversight. He said, "The future is not in hoarding tribal knowledge. It's in building agile systems that let us plug in talent as needed." Ruth muttered, "Talent plugs are not a thing." He continued, "We've identified opportunities to reduce operating overhead by transitioning certain supply chain coordination activities to an external contractor team. I knew then. Not suspected. Knew. There is a temperature change in a room when your job becomes a bullet point. Ethan looked directly at me for half a second, then away. Cowardice is often very brief. After the meeting, Marcus followed me back to my desk. Tell me he's not doing what I think he's doing, he said. He is. Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. He doesn't understand the continuity grid. No. He doesn't understand the client lanes. No. He thinks the contractors can run this from dashboards. Yes. Marcus stared at me. That's insane. It's formatted nicely, I said. Priya appeared beside us with her folder still clutched to her chest. He asked me yesterday whether Halden and Northlake use the same component families, she said. Marcus closed his eyes. I said, they do not. I told him that, Priya said. He said, close enough operationally. I looked at her. She said, I know. The restructuring meeting happened 4 days later. Conference room Harbor. 8th floor. 8:30 a.m. Frost on the inside edge of the window because Minneapolis in March likes to remind you that glass is only a suggestion. The HVAC hummed above us with that dry office heat that makes every room feel slightly guilty. At the table were Ethan, HR Director Kelly Moore, CFO Daniel Reeves, and me. Daniel would not look at me. That told me more than his spreadsheet would have. Kelly opened a folder. Her voice was soft in the rehearsed way HR uses when the company has already decided and now needs the human being to behave conveniently. Marisol, thank you for joining us. I was invited, I said. A small pause. Ethan took over. Of course he did. As part of our broader operational alignment, we've made the decision to eliminate your role effective today. There it was. Not reduce. Not transition. Eliminate. 11 years compressed into a sentence by a man who thought lead time meant the same thing as shipping time. Kelly slid a packet across the table. You'll receive 12 weeks of severance, continuation of benefits through the end of the month, and outplacement support. Daniel stared at the packet. Ethan stared at me like he was waiting for a performance. I gave him none. I said, I see. Ethan blinked. He had expected something. Objection, maybe. A speech. A visible crack. People who confuse control with volume are always surprised when quiet people stay quiet. He leaned forward. I want to emphasize this is not about your performance. Your contributions have been valuable. We're simply moving toward a more scalable model. Contractors, I said. Strategic partners. Contractors. His smile tightened. The external team will handle day-to-day coordination. I'll oversee the strategic layer. I looked at Daniel. Does the board know which vendor contracts are tied to individual escalation clauses? Daniel's eyes flicked up, then down. Ethan answered for him. We've mapped the critical dependencies. No, I said. You've mapped the vendors. The room got very still. He said, the contractors will have access to documentation. Good. Kelly cleared her throat. We'll need your laptop and badge before you leave today. I opened my bag, removed the laptop, and placed it on the table. Then I unclipped my badge and set it beside it. The plastic made a small, hard sound against the wood. That was the sound 11 years makes when it hits a conference table. Kelly looked almost pained. Daniel looked like a man calculating future regret. Ethan looked relieved. That was useful. I signed the severance acknowledgement receipt, not the agreement. There is a difference. One says you received paper. The other says you accept terms. I have always enjoyed differences that matter. Kelly said, you'll have until the end of the day to collect personal belongings, but your system access will be disabled immediately. Understood. Ethan stood as if the meeting had gone well. I hope we can count on your professionalism during the transition, he said. I looked at him. You eliminated the transition. He did not respond. I picked up my purse, stood, and walked out of Harbor. The hallway outside was colder than the room. Or maybe it just felt cleaner. At my desk, Marcus was standing already. Priya was behind him. Ruth had come down from quality and was pretending not to look concerned, which she did badly because Ruth's version of neutral has the emotional subtlety of a fire alarm. Marcus said no. Yes, I said. Priya's eyes went to my empty badge clip. They actually did it. They did. Ruth said, did they ask you about validation dependencies? No. Client allocations? No. Escalation clauses? No. Ruth took off her glasses. Put them back on. Of course not. I packed one box. A framed photo of my daughter at her orchestra concert, the one I had missed. A coffee mug Marcus had given me that said this could have been, and email. 2 notebooks that were mine, purchased by me, used for personal planning, containing no company data. A small ceramic fox my mother had given me because she said it looked like it knew things. It did. Priya stood beside my desk while I packed. What are we supposed to do now? She asked quietly. Document everything, I said. Marcus said, everything. Everything. Ruth looked at me. You knew this was coming. I knew it was possible. How long? I closed the box. Since Ethan printed the continuity grid. Marcus gave a short laugh with no humor in it. That was 6 weeks ago. Yes. At 9:42 a.m., I walked through the lobby carrying one box and no badge. The security guard, Leonard, who had been there longer than Ethan had been out of college, stood up when he saw me. Ms. Vega. Morning, Leonard. He looked at the box, then at my face. His jaw tightened. You take care. I will. Outside, the air cut through my coat immediately. Minneapolis has a way of making exits feel official. I put the box in my car, sat behind the wheel, and did not start the engine right away. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not call anyone. I opened my phone and sent one text to my attorney, Elena Park. It said, they did it. She replied 11 minutes later. Good. Send me the packet. What they did not know is that I had been preparing for exactly this kind of stupidity since 2019. That was the year Albright nearly lost Northlake Diagnostics because a secondary resin supplier failed an audit and nobody outside supply chain understood which contracts depended on which validation records. We saved the account by 46 hours. Not because leadership helped. Because I had a private dependency map in a notebook and Priya knew which vendor rep would answer after 7 p.m. After that, I stopped trusting memory as a corporate strategy. On May 14, 2019, I started building the vendor dependency ledger. Not on some secret server. Not with stolen data. Nothing theatrical. It was a professional record of what I personally managed: public vendor names, contract renewal dates, internal ownership notes, escalation histories, and the logic behind each continuity decision. It did not contain confidential pricing details. It did not contain protected client information. It contained the part companies always forget to document: why decisions were made, who had agreed to them, and what would break if someone changed them without understanding the sequence. By 2024, the ledger had 312 vendor records, 87 active escalation paths, and 41 client-specific risk notes written in plain English. The kind of plain English that saves you when the dashboard says green and the person who built the dashboard knows the vendor's plant is 2 days from a strike. On August 3, 2021, after a freight shutdown in British Columbia almost cost us a Halden surgical delivery window, I created the client commitment map. It connected client promises to supplier realities. If Halden needed calibration assemblies by Friday, the map showed which raw material, which supplier, which freight lane, which quality certificate, and which internal person had to move first. It was not elegant. It was useful. Useful tends to age better. On January 18th of the year Ethan arrived, 3 days after his introduction email, I began exporting my own professional accomplishments into a personal archive. Again, not company files. Not contract terms. Not confidential client documents. Summaries. Dates. Role descriptions. Results. Emails I was legally entitled to retain because they documented my employment and authorship of internal systems. Elena Park had reviewed the archive with me in February. She was the kind of attorney who made silence feel expensive. She sat across from me in her St. Paul office, reading through the severance language from the last reorganization Albright had done. After 15 minutes, she said, if they eliminate you and claim your systems are easily transferable, they are going to have a documentation problem. Because they aren't easily transferable? Because their own internal records show you are the transfer mechanism. That sentence stayed with me. I was the transfer mechanism. Not the laptop. Not the shared drive. Not the contractor onboarding packet Ethan believed would turn 11 years of operational judgment into a 2-week workflow. Me. The Supplier Continuity Grid had a manual. The Critical Parts Escalation Protocol had a manual. The Client Commitment Map had a manual. But manuals are not the same as judgment. A manual can tell you that vendor K is the approved alternate for a pressure control housing. It cannot tell you that vendor K's plant manager answers calls only if Priya texts first because their sales rep burned a bridge in 2022. It cannot tell you that Holden's procurement director says flexible when she means not negotiable. It cannot tell you that Northlake will accept a split shipment if Ruth personally confirms the quality release sequence by phone. That was the leverage. Not sabotage. Not deletion. Not hiding anything. I left the systems exactly where they were. Every file. Every protocol. Every dashboard. Every vendor contact inside company systems. I did not touch a thing. I simply stopped being the person who knew what those things meant. There is a difference. 48 hours later, Ethan called me. I was at home, sitting at my kitchen table with my severance packet, a legal pad, and coffee that was still hot because apparently unemployment improves beverage management. His name appeared on my phone at 7:36 a.m. I let it ring. Then I let it go to voicemail. The transcript arrived a minute later. Marisol, hi, it's Ethan. Listen, quick operational question. We're seeing some friction around the Holden valve assembly schedule, and I want to make sure the contractor team has the right visibility into the escalation architecture. Can you give me a call back? Should only take 5 minutes. Escalation architecture. He had eliminated my role on Monday. By Wednesday, he had discovered architecture. I forwarded the voicemail to Elena. She replied, do not call. If they want consultation, they can request terms in writing. So I made toast. At 9:12 a.m., Priya texted, are you available? I answered, not for company work. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, understood. But I need you to know what's happening. I waited. She wrote, Straightbridge told Holden we could consolidate 2 shipment windows into 1 to reduce freight spend. I stared at the message. Holden Surgical's production schedule was built around staged releases because their internal sterilization process could only absorb certain components in sequence. Consolidating shipment windows looked efficient on a freight spreadsheet and idiotic everywhere else. I typed, who approved that? Priya, Ethan. Of course. At 10:04 a.m., Marcus called. I did not answer. He texted instead. Not asking you to work. Just reporting the weather. It's raining fire. Then, Holden is rejecting the consolidated shipment. They're saying if Friday's first release misses, we trigger the service level penalty. The Holden service level penalty was $185,000 per missed window. That was not the real risk. The real risk was that Holden's master agreement allowed them to place Albright on supply probation after 2 preventable misses in a rolling 6-month period. Supply probation meant every shipment required additional review, payment terms tightened, and future awards froze until trust was restored. Companies talk about partnerships. Contracts talk about consequences. At 11:28 a.m., Ethan emailed my personal address. Subject, Transition Clarification. Marisol. Hope you're doing well. We're working through some knowledge transfer details with the Straightbridge team and could use your insight on the Holden release sequencing. Since this relates to work completed prior to your departure, I'd appreciate a quick call to ensure continuity. Best? Ethan. I read it twice. Since this relates to work completed prior to your departure. Elegant little phrase. It implied I owed them free labor because the mess involved a system I had built before they removed me from the building. I forwarded it to Elena. She replied with 1 sentence. Ask whether they are requesting paid consulting support. So I did. Ethan. Are you requesting paid consulting support? Marisol. His reply took 19 minutes. Marisol. I don't think we need to formalize it to that degree. Just trying to close a loop on something operationally simple. Ethan. Operationally simple. I looked at my kitchen clock. Then I closed the laptop. By 3:40 p.m., the first release window had slipped. Priya texted me 1 line. $185K penalty triggered. I put my phone face down. Not because I enjoyed it. Because watching a company harm itself after refusing to listen is a little like watching someone touch a stove they were warned was hot. You do not celebrate the burn. You simply do not apologize to the stove. The second problem hit before the first one was resolved. Thursday morning, Marcus sent me a screenshot of a freight dashboard with 3 red lanes. Northlake sensors stuck in Memphis. Contractor booked standard refrigerated instead of validated temperature controlled. Carrier won't release without corrected paperwork. Northlake Diagnostics used those pressure sensors and calibration equipment that had to ship under specific conditions. The product was not ruined yet, but the paperwork error meant quality had to review the chain before release. That could take hours. Sometimes a day. Ruth called at 8:51. I answered because Ruth would not ask me to do company work unless the building was already smoking. Her voice was flat. Tell me you are somewhere peaceful. My kitchen. Good. Stay there. What happened? Straightbridge sent the wrong temperature lane paperwork to Northlake's receiving team. Northlake forwarded it to their quality director. Their quality director forwarded it to their VP of operations. Their VP of operations has now asked whether Albright has changed validated logistics procedures without notification. That was worse than the shipment. The shipment was a mistake. The question was a relationship problem wearing a regulatory hat. I said, who responded? A pause. Ethan. I closed my eyes for 1 second. What did he say? Ruth read it, and I could hear paper in her hand. Albright is currently optimizing logistics workflows as part of a broader modernization effort. No material quality impact is anticipated. I said nothing. Ruth said, he used anticipated. Yes. He did not say the validated procedure was followed. No. He did not say the paperwork was corrected. No. He did not say quality was reviewing. No. Ruth inhaled through her nose. I may retire at lunch. You won't. No. But I may stand in the parking lot and think about it. At 12:22 p.m., Northlake placed the shipment on hold pending written corrective action. The line impact was estimated at $640,000 if release was delayed beyond Friday morning. At 1:05 p.m., Ethan called again. This time he left no voicemail. At 1:07, he texted. Need 5 minutes. This is time sensitive. I replied, please contact Elena Park. He responded almost immediately. Marisol, we're not at lawyer stage. I just need context. I looked at those words for a long moment. Then I typed, you eliminated the context. I did not send anything else. At 2:46 p.m., Priya texted. Everything's falling apart since you left. Then, a second later. I know you can't fix it. I just needed someone sane to read that sentence. I replied, document everything. She sent back, already am. That evening, Daniel Reeves emailed me. Not Ethan. Daniel. Subject, consulting inquiry. Marisol. Would you be open to a short-term consulting arrangement to support operational continuity during the transition? We are prepared to compensate you at a reasonable hourly rate. Daniel. Reasonable hourly rate. After 11 years, $8.7 million in savings, a supplier grid that kept 2 major clients calm through 3 years of disruption, and a termination packet delivered in conference room harbor. They had reached reasonable hourly rate in 3 business days. Progress, apparently. I forwarded the email to Elena. She called me this time. Do you want to engage? No. Good. Not yet. You sound pleased. I'm not pleased, she said. I'm professionally unsurprised. That was Elena's version of delight. She continued, they think this is a transition gap. It isn't. No. They think they can buy a few hours and stabilize the process. Yes. Let them put that in writing. They already did. They put the wrong thing in writing, she said. Wait. So I waited. Friday at 7:03 a.m., Marcus texted. Halden's second release at risk. Northlake wants corrective action by noon. Ethan scheduled an all-hands supply chain call at 8. At 8:41, Priya sent. He just told the contractors to leverage alternate supplier flexibility on Halden. I stared at the message. Halden's valve assembly had no approved alternate supplier for one subcomponent without a 90-day validation process. I typed, "Did anyone correct him?" "Priya, Ruth did." Then, he said validation was a quality preference. I stood up from the kitchen table. Not dramatically. Just enough to stop myself from touching the phone too quickly. A quality preference. There are sentences that do not merely reveal incompetence. They preserve it for future proceedings. At 9:12 a.m., Ruth texted me directly. "I am putting that quote in writing." Good. At 10:36 a.m., the email came from Kelly in HR. Subject: follow-up discussion. Marisol. Leadership would like to schedule a discussion today regarding transition support and potential advisory engagement. Please let us know your availability. Best, Kelly. I looked at the subject line. Follow-up discussion. Such a gentle phrase for a company standing ankle-deep in preventable damage. I sent it to Elena. Then I turned my phone over and made another cup of coffee. At 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes before Northlake's corrective action deadline, Ruth called. This time her voice was lower. Northlake rejected the response. What did Albright send? A one-page summary from Straightabridge saying logistics procedures are being reviewed for optimization. I looked out my kitchen window at the snow piled against the fence. And quality? Not consulted before it went out. Of course not. What happens now? Northlake has paused all open purchase releases pending a formal quality review. How much? Ruth was quiet for a second. $2.6 million in scheduled shipments over the next 8 weeks. That was the cliff edge. Then Marcus texted. Just 4 words. Board call it 3. Board call it 3. 4 words. Very clean. Very late. I looked at Marcus's text, then at the coffee cooling beside my laptop, and thought about conference room harbor. The dry office heat. The frost on the inside edge of the window. Ethan saying my role had been eliminated effective today, as if he were canceling a vending machine contract. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, they had discovered the vending machine had been holding up the ceiling. I did not attend the board call. I was not invited. That did not stop 3 people from summarizing it for me before dinner. Priya texted first. Daniel just had to explain the Halden penalty and Northlake pause on one slide. Ethan kept saying workflow optimization until Gerald asked him what workflow had actually been optimized. Gerald Albright was the CEO. Ethan's father. A man who had spent 30 years building Albright Medical Components and 6 months pretending his son had inherited operational judgment through surname absorption. Marcus followed 2 minutes later. Ethan said Straightabridge had identified legacy friction points. Ruth asked whether a validated logistics lane counts as friction. Then Ruth. I said it calmly. Of course she did. Ruth Bennett could remove the skin from a bad argument without raising her voice. By the end of the second week, the first wave had become a company-wide crisis. Not a supply chain issue. That was the soothing phrase people used on day 3, when they still believed the damage had boundaries. By day 10, sales was apologizing to clients, finance was revising forecasts, quality was drafting corrective actions, legal was reviewing contract exposure. And operations was discovering that contractors with templates are less useful when the problem has a serial number, a frozen shipment, and a client VP asking why nobody at Albright knows their own commitments. The technical failure came first. Straightabridge uploaded the wrong supplier status file into the procurement planning dashboard. Not maliciously, just competently enough to be dangerous. They marked an Ohio machining supplier as available for expedited coverage because the vendor portal showed open capacity. The vendor did have capacity for non-medical work. Their validated medical line was booked for 9 weeks and could not accept Halden component work without a quality release review. Priya had known that. Ruth had known that. I had written it in the vendor dependency ledger in plain language on September 6th of the previous year. The contractor team did not read the note because it was not in the column they were filtering. That is the problem with dashboards. They make the world look tidy right before it bites. Ethan approved the alternate sourcing recommendation. Halden's second release missed. Another $185,000 penalty. More importantly, Halden issued a formal notice of supply probation. That froze $5.4 million in scheduled purchase orders until Albright could prove its continuity process had not been dismantled by a man with white sneakers and a vocabulary full of fog. The relational failure came next. Northlake Diagnostics requested a corrective action call with quality, supply chain, and executive leadership. Ruth prepared a response that was specific, factual, and survivable. It acknowledged the paperwork error, confirmed no validated procedure had actually changed, and committed to a controlled review of contractor access before any future logistics bookings. Ethan rewrote it. He removed the specifics, added phrases, sent it before Ruth could stop him. On the call, Northlake's VP of Operations asked one direct question. Has Albright changed the validated temperature-controlled logistics procedure associated with our sensor assemblies? Ethan answered, we're enhancing the logistics ecosystem to create more flexible routing intelligence. Ruth told me later there was a 3-second silence. 3 seconds is a long time on a client call. It is even longer when everyone on the call has realized the person speaking does not know what he is saying. Northlake repeated the question. Ethan said, no material impact is anticipated. That was not an answer. Northlake noticed. By the end of that call, Northlake placed Albright on a formal 60-day supplier review and froze all new releases under their $11.8 million annual components agreement. Existing orders were allowed to proceed only after quality signed off on each lane individually. Ruth texted me afterward. He said ecosystem again. I replied, I'm sorry. She wrote back, for the word or the company? Yes. The financial failure arrived through finance, because finance eventually finds every mess and assigns it a number. Daniel Reeves had to approve emergency freight, short-run machining, premium supplier capacity, and third-party quality audits just to keep Holden and Northlake from walking completely. The projected savings from eliminating my role had been $180,000 a year, including benefits. By day 12, Albright had already approved $1.3 million in emergency logistics spend. By day 14, that number was $2.1 million. By day 16, after 2 air freight releases, a weekend quality review, and a premium capacity payment to an alternate supplier that had been available all along if someone had called the right person, finance circulated a revised exposure estimate for $0.2 million. I know because Marcus sent me the subject line. Emergency operations spend, board review required. He added, they saved your salary so hard. I set the phone down and let myself smile for exactly 1 second. Not because the company was bleeding. Because arithmetic is one of the few corporate languages executives eventually respect. The regulatory failure came in the 3rd week. Ruth had warned them. Repeatedly. She had documented every concern. She had used words like validated procedure, client quality file, and notification requirement, which are apparently less exciting than scalable vendor abstraction, but much more useful when your client asks whether you changed a controlled process without telling them. Holden requested a quality conference with Albright's leadership team and their supplier assurance group. It was held in Cascade, the same training room where Ethan had presented Project Streamline under a slide about platform-enabled agility. This time Holden joined by video. Their procurement director. Their quality lead. Their operations counsel. Ruth attended in person. Daniel attended. Ethan attended. Straightbridge attended with matching slide backgrounds and the confidence of people billing by the hour. Ethan opened with a presentation. That was his public mistake. He stood at the front of Cascade and presented a supply chain modernization status update to Holden, Daniel, Ruth, and 2 board members attending remotely. He used the words optimization, transition, and vendor flexibility 11 times in 19 minutes. He described the missed release as a temporary communication artifact. A communication artifact. Holden's quality lead stopped him on slide 6. Mr. Albright, are you saying the missed release was caused by communication or by a change in sourcing and logistics execution? Ethan glanced at the slide. I'd characterize it as a transitional alignment issue. Ruth closed her notebook. Holden's operations counsel said that is not a characterization we can use. Then Daniel asked Ethan to pull up the supplier validation path for the alternate recommendation he had approved. Ethan clicked to the wrong slide. Then another wrong slide. Then he said, in front of Halden, Ruth, Daniel, Stradabridge, and 2 board members, the validation pathway is more of a quality-side preference than a supply-side constraint. There are sentences that do not merely end meetings. They become evidence. Ruth said, "Stop." 1 word. Every person in that room understood it. Halden ended the call 10 minutes later. By 4 o'clock, they issued written notice that Albright was being placed on enhanced supplier oversight for 90 days, and that all new component awards were suspended pending demonstrated corrective action. Their active agreement was worth $9.6 million annually. That got the board's full attention. Not partial attention. Not the attention executives give to background concerns while thinking about golf and quarterly margin. Full attention. At 5:38 that evening, Daniel Reeves called me. I answered because Daniel had, at least, looked ashamed in harbor. "Marisol," he said. "We need help." I assumed. He took that without comment. "The board has authorized an advisory engagement. Short term. Premium rate. We need you to help stabilize Halden and Northlake." "What rate?" $300 an hour. I looked at my kitchen window again. Snowmelt this time. The fence line showing through in patches. "No." A pause. "For 100. "No." "Marisol, I'm trying to be respectful here." "I know. What would be acceptable?" I let the silence sit between us. "Daniel," I said, "you're still trying to rent the fire extinguisher after burning down the manual." He exhaled slowly. "That's your answer?" "That's my answer." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The board may call directly." They should. The call came the next morning. Not from Ethan. Not from Kelly. From Gerald Albright. I was sitting at my kitchen table with Elena Park on speaker when his name appeared on my phone. Elena went silent without needing to be asked. Good attorneys understand theater, even when they dislike the word. I answered. "Mr. Albright." "Marisol," he said. "Thank you for taking my call." "You're welcome. I owe you an apology." That was a good opening. Late, but good. He continued, "The decision to eliminate your role was made under the assumption that your responsibilities could be transferred through documentation and contractor support. That assumption was wrong." Yes. On the other end, I heard him take a breath. "We need you back." There it was. Not advisory support. Not a reasonable hourly rate. Back. Before I could answer, another voice cut in. "Ethan." "Marisol, we're in a critical stabilization window, and I think if we can just align on the operational knowledge transfer." Gerald said, "Ethan." Ethan stopped. "Barely." Gerald continued, "We are prepared to reinstate you immediately. Senior Director of Supply Chain Operations. 220,000 base. Retention bonus. Full authority to work with Stradabridge and internal teams." It was not a bad offer in a world where conference room harbor had not happened. But it had. I said no. Silence. Gerald said, "May I ask why?" "Yes," I said. "You're still asking me to report to the mistake." No one spoke. Specific. Accurate. Efficient. Ethan made a small sound, like he had swallowed a memo. Gerald said, "What would it take?" I looked at Elena. She nodded once. "I'll meet with the board," I said. "In person. No Stradabridge. No pre-written role. No assumption that I am returning to support Ethan's operating model." Gerald said, "Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. "Where?" "Conference room harbor." Another pause. Gerald understood the choice. "Done," he said. The next morning, I drove back to Albright Medical Components for the first time since I had carried one box through the lobby. Same parking lot. Same gray building. Same wind cutting across the asphalt like it had a personal problem with exposed skin. Leonard was at the security desk. He looked up and stood. "Ms. Vega." "Morning, Leonard." His eyes went to the visitor badge in my hand. "You here to fix it?" I said, "I'm here to discuss terms." He smiled just enough. "Better." Conference room harbor looked exactly the same. Frost on the inside edge of the window. Dry office heat. A pitcher of water on the credenza that nobody would touch. At the table were Gerald Albright, Daniel Reeves, Kelly Moore, Ruth Bennett, and Ethan. Elena sat beside me. Ethan did not look well. His suit was still expensive, but the confidence had gone missing somewhere between Halden's written notice and the board's emergency session. Gerald started. Marisol, before we discuss terms, I want to say plainly that eliminating your role was a serious operational error. The board understands that now. I said, good. Ethan leaned forward too quickly. We all understand the transition had gaps. But we need to move forward and get out of blame framing. The clients need confidence, and I think if you come back as a senior advisor inside my structure. No, I said. One word. Small room. Very effective. His mouth stayed open for half a second. I continued. If I return in an executive role. Gerald nodded. What role? Chief Operations Officer. Ethan actually laughed. Not much. Just one sharp, incredulous sound. Then he realized no one joined him. I looked at him. You have that title now, I said. That is one of the problems. His face reddened. Gerald said, continue. My previous base salary was $180,000. My new base is $540,000. 3 times. $120,000 signing bonus. 2% equity participation tied to operational margin recovery over 3 years. Daniel wrote it down. Carefully. Finance learns quickly when the invoice is already $4.2 million. Full authority over supply chain operations, logistics, vendor management, continuity planning, and contractor access. Straightabridge reports to me until I determine whether they remain. No executive overrides on supplier changes, validated logistics lanes, client-specific release sequencing, or emergency freight decisions. Gerald said, understood. Priya Nair is promoted to Director of Supplier Continuity with a 25% raise. Marcus Chin is promoted to Director of Logistics Intelligence with a 25% raise. Ruth Bennett retains final quality authority over validated procedures, and no operations executive may issue client-facing quality language without her approval. Ruth's expression did not change, which for Ruth meant she was pleased. Each of them receives a written apology acknowledging that their documented warnings were disregarded. Kelly wrote faster. Ethan said, this is becoming punitive. I turned to him. No, I said. It's becoming accurate. Elena placed a folder on the table. I opened it. Final condition. A formal incident report documenting Project Streamline, the elimination of my role, the transfer assumptions, the contractor errors, the client probation notices, the $4.2 million emergency spend, and the specific decisions that led to each event. It goes to the board, legal, finance, quality, and the operational record. Ethan sat back. No, absolutely not. Gerald looked at him. Ethan continued, faster now. You can't put that in writing. That creates liability across the entire modernization initiative. We need forward-looking remediation language, not a historical blame document. There it was. The panic with better shoes. I said, no report, no return. He looked at me like I had insulted gravity. Marisol, people are trying to save the company. I know, I said. That's why the report matters. He turned to Gerald. Dad, you cannot allow. Gerald's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Do not, Gerald said, call me that in this room. Ethan went still. Gerald looked at me. The report will be completed. Ethan said, with my name in it? I looked at him. If your decisions are in the timeline, I said, your name will be in the timeline. He put both hands on the table. Do you want me destroyed? No, I said. I want the next person to read what happened before they call validation a preference. Ruth looked down at her notebook. Daniel stopped writing for half a second. Gerald said, agreed. The final agreement took 2 hours and 13 minutes. Elena revised the language twice. Daniel confirmed the equity participation structure. Kelly drafted the apology letters while sitting at the same table where she had handed me severance paperwork 3 weeks earlier. There was symmetry in that. Corporate paperwork enjoys returning to the scene of the crime. Ethan objected to the incident report 6 more times. He lost 6 times. When I signed the offer letter, the room was quiet. Not celebratory. Corrective. Gerald said. When can you start? Monday. Can we ask for today? You can ask, I said. A small pause. Gerald nodded. Monday. On Monday morning, I walked back into Albright Medical Components through the front lobby carrying no box. Leonard stood again. This time he had a permanent badge ready. The title under my name read, Chief Operations Officer. He handed it to me with both hands, like it was heavier than plastic. Looks better, he said. It is better, I said. The operations bullpen went quiet when I stepped off the elevator. Not awkward quiet. Relief quiet. The kind of silence people make when they have been holding their breath for 3 weeks and finally see the person who knows where the oxygen valve is. Priya stood first. Chief Operations Officer, she said. Yes. She looked past me toward the executive hallway. That's going to be an interesting org chart. It already is. Marcus came around his desk, holding a stack of printed lane reports. I have 3 red lanes, 2 vendor conflicts, and 1 contractor file that makes me want to leave the state. Good morning to you too. He exhaled. Sorry. Don't be. Bring them to my office in 15. Ruth appeared from quality with a folder under one arm. I have Halden on hold at 9:30, she said. Northlake at 11. I have not let Ethan near either call. Excellent. She looked at my badge. COO, she said. Yes. About time. That was Ruth's version of confetti. My first call was with Halden. I did not apologize in vague language. Vague apologies are for people who hope no one asks for receipts. I said, Albright changed execution oversight without properly preserving the validated release sequence. That was our failure. The previous procedure is reinstated effective immediately. Ruth Bennett retains quality sign-off. Priya Nair owns supplier continuity. I own operational accountability. Halden's procurement director said, Are you authorized to make those commitments? Yes. And if there is a conflict? There won't be. But if there is, I overrule it. There was a pause. Then she said, That is the first clear answer we've received in 3 weeks. By Friday, Halden lifted the freeze on existing purchase orders, though probation remained for 90 days. Fair enough. Trust is not a light switch. It is a valve. You reopen it carefully. Northlake took longer. Their VP of Operations wanted a written corrective action, a full lane audit, and weekly quality calls for 6 weeks. They were right to ask. We gave them all of it. Ruth led the quality portion. Marcus rebuilt the logistics lane validation table. Priya reestablished supplier release sequencing. I signed the final corrective action myself. No anticipated. No ecosystem. No fog. Just commitments with names attached. Straightabridge lasted 16 days under my authority. Not because I had a personal issue with contractors. Contractors can be useful when they are placed under people who understand the work. Straightabridge had been placed above the work, which is how you get a 27-page transformation deck and a frozen $11.8 million client agreement. I retained 2 of their analysts for data cleanup. I terminated the rest of the engagement. The savings from that decision alone paid for Priya's and Marcus's raises by June. The incident report was completed in week 5. 22 pages. Clean. Direct. Legally reviewed. No theatrical language. No adjectives that were not earned. It documented Project Streamline, the elimination of my role, the transfer assumptions, the Halden shipment collapse, the Northlake logistics error, Ethan's quality preference statement, the Straightabridge failures, and the emergency spend approval path. Ethan objected to page 11, page 14, and page 19. Page 11 quoted him saying validation was a quality preference. Page 14 documented his unauthorized language to Northlake. Page 19 tied the $4.2 million spent to the elimination of internal operational authority. Legal reviewed the objections. The pages stayed. 6 months later, Albright Medical Components was not just stable. It was better. That surprised some people. It did not surprise me. A crisis, handled correctly, can become a very expensive training program. As Chief Operations Officer, I rebuilt supply chain around documented judgment instead of individual heroics. The Supplier Continuity Grid became an approved executive operating system with quarterly board review. The client commitment map was integrated with finance forecasting, quality release planning, and sales commitments, so no one could promise a delivery date unless operations, logistics, and quality all agreed reality was invited. We created the Operational Change Control Board. Boring name. Beautiful function. No supplier switch, logistics lane change, contractor access expansion, or client-facing procedure language could be approved without sign-off from operations, quality, finance, and the responsible client owner. It slowed bad ideas by exactly the right amount. Priya Nair was thriving as Director of Supplier Continuity. She knew every vendor that mattered and now had the title and authority to match the work. Vendors who had once bypassed her to find a more pliable executive learned quickly that the route had closed. Marcus Chin became Director of Logistics Intelligence and turned our freight data into something even Daniel respected. He built a lane risk dashboard that did not replace judgment, but supported it. There is a difference, and at Albright we had paid $4.2 million to learn it. Ruth Bennett remained Director of Quality Assurance, but her authority was written into operations policy in a way no one could conveniently forget. If Ruth said a validated procedure could not change, the conversation ended until evidence arrived. Halden came off probation after 90 days. Not early. On time. Their procurement director told me, on the final review call, you restored confidence because you stopped trying to sound confident and started being specific. I wrote that down. Northlake resumed full releases in month 4 and renewed their $11.8 million annual agreement with one additional condition. I would remain named executive owner for the first year of the restored relationship. I accepted. By month 6, shortage rates had dropped back to 2.4%. Emergency freight was down 61% from the crisis peak. Supplier on-time performance was 96.8%. We had recovered $1.1 million through vendor credits, canceled contractor scope, and corrected freight routing. More importantly, sales stopped whispering apologies before client calls. Ethan was still at Albright. He was Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives now, which is the kind of title companies use when they need a family member employed and contained at the same time. He had no authority over supply chain, logistics, quality, or client commitments. Any operational proposal from his office required review by the Operational Change Control Board, which meant, in practical terms, that it required adults. He attended meetings. He spoke less. When Ruth said validation, he wrote it down. That was growth. Not inspirational growth. Supervised growth. Gerald did not exile him. I did not ask him to. Destroying Ethan would have taught the company less than limiting him in writing. The org chart told the truth every day, and the truth had a permanent badge. The total cost of Project Streamline was calculated at $6.8 million by the end of the second quarter. That included the $4.2 million emergency logistics spend, $370,000 in client penalties, $940,000 in premium supplier capacity, $610,000 in legal and quality remediation costs, $480,000 in canceled contractor fees that could not be recovered, and $200,000 in delayed revenue recognition tied to the Northlake freeze. They eliminated my role to save $180,000. Then they spent $6.8 million learning what the role did. My life changed too. Professionally, yes. The salary made certain things easier in the way money is supposed to make things easier when it has been earned correctly. My daughter graduated that spring, and for the first time in years, I did not take a supplier call during the ceremony, the lunch, or the drive home. When her orchestra played the final piece, I sat in the third row with my phone turned off inside my purse. Not silenced. Off. Afterward, she hugged me in the school lobby and said, "You didn't check it once." "No," I said. She looked at me like she was deciding whether to make a joke. Then she said, "Good." That one word mattered more than the title, which is inconvenient for corporate storytelling, but very true. Sometimes, when I walk past conference room harbor, I still remember the sound of my badge hitting the table. Small. Hard. Final. I remember Ethan saying, "We're simply moving toward a more scalable model," and Kelly sliding the packet across the wood, and Daniel looking down because numbers are easier when they are not wearing a face. I also remember what happened after. The calls, the penalties, the frozen releases, the quality review. The board discovering, line by line and invoice by invoice, that operations is not a cost center when it prevents costs from existing. That is the part people like Ethan never understand. They see a salary and think it is an expense. They do not see the penalties that never triggered, the clients that never escalated, the shipments that never failed, the nights no one noticed because someone else had already moved the problem out of the way. Good operations is invisible until it is gone. Then it is very visible. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, if they eliminate the person who knows why the system works, they are not cutting costs. They are buying the invoice they never had to receive.